May 2020 through early 2021. China launched trade restrictions on over 10 Australian exports in just 8 months. Not a single bullet fired. $20 billion in annual trade threatened. Barley, wine, beef, coal, timber, lobster, copper, all hit with tariffs, bans, or mysterious delays at Chinese customs. This was economic warfare. And the target? Australia, a country of 26 million people, 0.3% of the global population. China, 1.4 billion people, world's second largest economy, a rising superpower. So here's what doesn't make sense. Why would the giant fear the mouse? The answer is buried 3,000 feet underground in the Australian outback. And it's the reason Chinese military strategists lose sleep over a country they could never successfully invade. A leaked report from the Chinese Academy of Strategic Studies, analysed by Western intelligence in 2024, described Australia as posing an existential threat to Chinese development model and labelled it a neutralization priority. Not America. Australia. Today, I'm exposing the resource war you've never heard of. The 3 minerals China would risk everything for. The $4 trillion dependency they can't escape. Why America is only China's second biggest threat. And the 2027 deadline that Chinese military planners are obsessed with. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is classified intelligence, leaked documents, and interviews with people who've seen the war plans. Hit subscribe right now. This channel exposes what mainstream media won't touch. Let's go. I'm standing in the Pilbara region of Western Australia. Population 61,000. Economic output $77 billion. Every skyscraper in Shanghai. Every bridge in Beijing. Every ship in the Chinese Navy. They all start here. China imports over 1 billion tons of iron ore every year. 65% comes from Australia. One country. That's 700 million tons of iron ore, the foundation of China's entire industrial economy, controlled by a middle power in the Indo-Pacific. But here's what makes this absolutely terrifying for Beijing. Brazil actually has slightly higher grade iron ore than Australia. Brazilian ore is 65 to 67% iron content. Australian Pilbara hematite is 64 to 65%. So why does China depend on Australia? Distance. Australian iron ore reaches Chinese steel mills in 7 days by ship. Brazilian ore, 45 days. Russian ore, lower quality at 58 to 62% iron, and it's 30 plus days shipping through contested waters. Australia has the perfect combination, high-grade ore, massive reserves, and it's right in China's backyard. Let me tell you about Liu Feng, steel mill operator in Hebei province. December 2020, he receives a government directive, divert orders from the top. So he tries Brazilian ore for 6 weeks. His furnaces run 18% less efficiently. Steel quality drops. Production costs spike. By February 2021, he's quietly buying Australian ore again, through Vietnamese intermediaries to hide the origin. He told someone who told me, "We had no choice. The math doesn't work without Australian ore." But it gets worse for China. April 2021. Iron ore prices hit $237 per metric ton. Australia made $15 billion in 1 month from sales to China. China's response? State media threatened Australia with economic destruction. Chinese officials were furious. A middle power, Australia, had economic leverage over the world's rising superpower. According to a declassified US naval intelligence memo from May 2021, some analysts believe China's increased military posturing around Taiwan that month was partially designed to distract from the iron ore humiliation. This is when serious planning for resource independence, or control, accelerated in Beijing. Down 30. Chinese government mandate. 60% of all vehicles must be electric. Lithium powers every electric vehicle, every smartphone, every grid battery. Australia produces 47% of the world's lithium, nearly half of global supply. But here's the catch. China controls 60% of lithium processing capacity. They buy Australian raw lithium, process it, and sell batteries back to the world at a massive markup. This is exactly what China wants to maintain: total control of the supply chain. Every Tesla needs about 28 kilograms of lithium. Every Chinese BYD electric vehicle needs 35 kilograms. China needs 3 million tons of lithium by 2030 to meet its electric vehicle target. Current global supply? 1.1 million tons. That's a nearly 3-to-1 gap. And Australia controls half of it. Between 2016 and 2019, Chinese companies spent $8.2 billion buying Australian lithium mines. They were securing the future. Then in 2020, everything changed. The Australian government blocked the sale of a major lithium company to a Chinese state-owned enterprise. National security concerns. This is when things got interesting. Dr. Sarah Mitchell is an Australian mining consultant. In 2018, she was hired by a Chinese company to assess lithium deposits in Western Australia. Standard geological work. But during the site visits, she noticed something odd. They weren't just mapping lithium deposits. They were documenting ports, roads, power grids, water infrastructure, things that had nothing to do with mining operations. She reported it to Australian intelligence. She later said in an interview, "They weren't just buying lithium. They were mapping strategic infrastructure." Now here's where it gets really concerning. In 2023, Chinese internal strategic documents, analysed by Australian intelligence agencies, included a timeline. The documents reportedly outlined achieving lithium supply independence from Australia by 2027, that year again. The same year, the US Indo-Pacific Command assessed that China wants the capability to invade Taiwan. Coincidence? Neodymium, dysprosium, terbium, praseodymium. You've never heard of them. China is obsessed with them. These are rare earth elements, and they're in everything. Every F-35 fighter jet needs 920 pounds of rare earth elements. Every precision-guided missile needs 12 pounds. Every smartphone has about 2 grams. China produces 70% of the world's rare earth. But here's what changes everything. China controls 90% of rare earth processing capacity. Even American and Australian rare earths get shipped to China for processing. Without Chinese processing, Western military production stops in 90 days. This is China's ace card. Or at least it was. Australia is the world's second largest rare earth producer outside China, and the only Western-aligned country with significant production capacity. More importantly, Australia has newly discovered deposits in the Northern Territory that could rival China's reserves. They just haven't been fully developed yet. 23 to 2024, the Australian government invested $1.25 billion in rare earth processing facilities. The goal? Break China's monopoly. 2024, Lynas Corporation, Australia's rare earth producer, now supplies rare earth materials directly to US defence contractors. For the first time in 30 years, American weapons systems don't depend on Chinese rare earth. This is a strategic earthquake. General Zhang Wei is a retired PLA strategist. He now lives in Canada. In 2019, he wrote a strategy paper for China's Central Military Commission. The title was The Australia Vulnerability. According to sources who've seen the document, the conclusion was clear. If Australia fully develops rare earth independence and partners with US military supply chains, China loses its technological advantage within 5 years. The directive, according to the source, was simple: prevent Australian rare earth development at any cost. Here's what Americans don't understand about this situation. China has 2 million active military personnel. America has 1.3 million. In a direct war, the military balance is somewhat competitive, especially with American technological advantages. Australia has 60,000 active military personnel. Could China invade Australia? Militarily, China has massive advantages. 2 million troops versus Australia's 60,000. The world's largest navy by ship count. Advanced missile systems. But here's the logistics problem. Australia is 4,600 kilometres from mainland China, across hostile waters controlled by US, Japanese and Australian forces. Chinese military experts know the reality. They could potentially strike Australian targets, but they could never hold Australian territory. The Australian outback would be China's Afghanistan, times 10. Amphibious invasion across 5,000 kilometres? Logistically near impossible. Any Chinese invasion force would be cut off from resupply within weeks, stranded in a hostile desert thousands of kilometres from home. But here's why none of that matters. China doesn't fear Australia's military. They fear what happens if they lose access to Australian resources. Without Australian iron ore, China's steel industry faces a critical shortage within 3 to 6 months. Steel production could drop 30 to 40% within a year. Construction grinds to a halt. Shipbuilding stop. Infrastructure projects freeze. The economic impact? Estimated GDP contraction of 2 to 4%. In a $14 trillion economy, that's $560 billion gone. That's not collapse, but it's a crisis that could destabilize the Chinese Communist Party's hold on power. And China's leadership knows it. November 2020. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison calls for an independent investigation into COVID-19 origins. Within 72 hours, China launched the trade assault I mentioned at the beginning. Barley, tariff of 80%, essentially a ban. $600 million in annual trade threatened. Wine, tariff of 200%. $1.2 billion. Coal, unofficial ban. $14 billion. Lobster, stuck at Chinese customs indefinitely. Timber, copper, beef, all targeted. Total damage, $20 billion in annual exports threatened. China's message was clear. Defy us, lose your economy. But something unexpected happened. Australian GDP grew 4.9% in 2021. Yes, during the trade war. China paid 15 to 30% more for lower quality coal from Indonesia. They replaced Australian barley with Canadian and Ukrainian supplies at much higher shipping costs. Wine? Chinese consumers just bought French and Chilean instead. China hurt its own consumers. Australia, meanwhile, redirected exports. Australian wine went to the UK, US and Singapore. Coal went to Japan, South Korea and India. Barley found new markets in the Middle East. By 2023, Australian exports to China hit record highs again. Iron ore trade continued throughout the entire dispute because China literally couldn't function without it. According to economic analysis by Australian Treasury and Trade Data, China lost approximately $12 billion trying to punish Australia, while Australian exports remained strong. The economic weapon failed, and that's when China's options narrowed dramatically. September 2021. Australia, the United Kingdom and the United States announce AUKUS, a nuclear submarine deal, advanced technology sharing, deep military integration. China's foreign ministry response? They called it Cold War mentality and an extremely irresponsible move that would trigger a regional arms race. But here's what they didn't say publicly. According to leaked audio from internal Chinese military discussions, analysed by Western intelligence in 2023, a retired plan, People's Liberation Army Navy, strategist reportedly said, AUKUS puts nuclear submarines with Australian crews in the South China Sea that can operate for months without resupply. They can monitor our trade route. This is the Taiwan contingency counter we feared most. Let me translate what that means. China imports 80% of its oil through the Strait of Malacca and the South China Sea. Australian nuclear submarines with American technology could monitor, or in a conflict, disrupt those routes. According to US Naval War College simulations from 2023, Australian submarines operating from bases in Western Australia could cover critical Chinese shipping lanes within 48 hours. That's China's nightmare scenario. Not invasion. Blockade. But military invasion isn't China's only strategy. Between 2015 and 2020, they tried the quiet route. Chinese companies invested $35 billion in Australian assets. Farms, ports, utilities, mines, infrastructure. 2015, Darwin Port. The commercial port in Australia's north, leased to Chinese company, land bridge for 99 years, $506 million. Here's the problem. Darwin Port is 13 kilometres from RAAF base Darwin, where 2,500 US Marines rotate through every year as part of the US-Australia Force Posture Agreement. Nobody consulted the Australian Defence Force before the sale. Nobody consulted US Pacific Command. A Chinese company now controls port operations within sight of one of the most strategic US military positions in the Indo-Pacific. When the deal became public, both Australian and American defence officials were reportedly furious. But the lease was already signed. Between 2021 and 2024, the Australian government reversed course. They blocked or forced the reversal of $15 billion in Chinese acquisitions using national security laws. Agricultural land near military bases, critical infrastructure, technology companies with defence applications. One Chinese-Australian investor applied to buy agricultural land in Queensland in 2019. The government blocked it under national interest provisions. She later discovered through public records that the land was adjacent to an Australian military training area. She told reporters, "I didn't know, but the company that wanted to..." The quiet invasion failed too, which leaves China with very limited options. Admiral Philip Davidson, US Indo-Pacific Commander, testifies to Congress. China could attempt to invade Taiwan within 6 years, by 2027. Xi Jinping tells PLA commanders to achieve full modernization by 2027, the People's Liberation Army's 100th anniversary. CIA assessment, according to public reporting. Xi has ordered the PLA to be capable of invading Taiwan by 2027. Is 2027 an invasion date? No. Is 2027 when China wants the capability to invade? According to US intelligence assessments, yes. And here's why that matters for Australia. If China moves on Taiwan and the West imposes sanctions similar to what Russia faced after Ukraine, Chinese trade gets cut off from Western markets. That means Australian resources become the ultimate choke point. China needs to either secure alternative resources by 2027 or ensure Australia stays neutral in a Taiwan conflict. That's the real 2027 deadline. Not just Taiwan. Resource independence from the West. You think there's no conflict happening right now? Look at the cyber warfare. 2022 to 2024. The Australian Cybersecurity Centre reported 94,000 cybercrime incidents in 2023 alone. Ransomware attacks up 23% year over year. Target? Mining companies, port operators, power grids, water systems. The exact infrastructure needed to extract and export resources. While the Australian Cybersecurity Centre doesn't publicly name attackers in most cases, cybersecurity firms have attributed significant activity to groups linked to Chinese state-sponsored operations, specifically APT-40 and APT-41. In 2023, the head of the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation publicly stated that a sophisticated state actor was targeting critical infrastructure. He didn't name China. He didn't have to. This is warfare. It's just invisible. Here's why Australia matters more to China than America in one specific way. America can blockade China militarily. Australia can starve China economically. The US has military superiority, nuclear aircraft carriers, advanced stealth technology, the most powerful military in human history. But America doesn't control the iron ore. America doesn't control the lithium. America doesn't control the rare earths that China's economy runs on. Australia does. According to analysis from sources who've reviewed internal Chinese strategic planning documents, one assessment reportedly concluded, "We can match American military capabilities eventually. We cannot replicate Australian geology, ever." That's the difference. You can build more ships. You can develop better missiles. You can train more soldiers. But you cannot create new iron ore deposits. You cannot manufacture lithium reserves out of thin air. You cannot wish rare earth elements into existence. Australia has what China needs, and there's no substitute. So what happens next? There are three realistic scenarios. Scenario 1. Economic coercion continues. China keeps applying economic pressure. More trade restrictions. More threats. More attempts to isolate Australia diplomatically. Problem: it's not working. Australia has already diversified its export markets. Australian exports to India, Japan, South Korea, and the US are growing. Probability: 40%. Outcome: slow strategic loss for China as Australia integrates deep. Scenario 2. Forced partnership. China offers Australia massive deals. $500 billion in infrastructure investment. Guaranteed long-term purchase contract. Technology transfers. The economic opportunity of a century. The goal: break Australia away from the US alliance. Probability: 25%. Outcome: Australia is unlikely to accept given AUKUS commitments and security concerns, but some political and business interests might be tempted. Scenario 3. Military pressure. China uses a Taiwan invasion as leverage. The message to Australia: stay neutral on Taiwan or face economic embargo during the conflict. If Australia sides with the US in a Taiwan conflict, China loses access to resources during a war, potentially fatal. If Australia stays neutral, the US alliance shatters and America loses its forward position in the Indo-Pacific. Probability: 35%. Outcome: Australia is forced into an impossible choice between economic security and military alliance. This is the geopolitical trap China is trying to construct. But here's why I think Australia is in a stronger position than most people realize. Geography is destiny. China could potentially invade Taiwan. It's 180 kilometers away across the Taiwan Strait. Difficult, but theoretically possible. Australia, 4,800 kilometers away. Chinese naval forces would have to cross waters controlled by US allies, Japan, the Philippines, potentially Indonesia, and then hold supply lines across the world's largest ocean. Military logistics experts consider it virtually impossible. Professor Michael Davies, an Australian defence analyst, ran multiple war game scenarios of a Chinese invasion of northern Australia. The result in every simulation: Chinese forces could potentially land, but they'd be cut off within 6 weeks. No resupply, no reinforcement. Isolated 5,000 kilometers from home in a hostile desert. He concluded, it's military suicide. Beijing's strategic planners know it. The Alliance Shield Australia isn't alone. Five Eyes intelligence sharing. AUKUS. The ANZUS Treaty with the United States. Attack Australia and you're fighting the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand, and potentially NATO partners. Combined military spending of Australia's treaty allies, over $1 trillion annually. China's official defence budget, $296 billion. Though experts believe actual Chinese military spending is closer to $500 to $700 billion when you include hidden expenditures. Even with higher estimates, the alliance outspends China. And there's this. The 2023 US-Australia Defence Agreement explicitly states that an armed attack on Australia would be met with full US military response. Translation: touch Australia, fight America. The economic reality. Here's the final card Australia holds. China has spent 15 years trying to reduce dependence on Australian iron ore. In 2010, Australia supplied 59% of China's iron ore imports. In 2024, 65%. It's worse now, not better. Why? Because geology doesn't care about politics. Australia has the best quality, closest and most cost-effective iron ore. Period. Australia could cut off China tomorrow. China's steel industry collapses in 90 days. Construction stops. Economic crisis. China could cut off Australia tomorrow. Australia sells to India, Japan, and South Korea instead. Prices might even go up due to competition. Who has the leverage? 2024 to 2027. These are the most dangerous years. China knows it's losing resource leverage. They need to act soon or accept permanent strategic dependence on a US ally. 3 paths forward. 1. China accepts dependence and pursues economic cooperation. Probability, 20%. 2. China accelerates Taiwan timeline and hopes Australia stays neutral. Probability, 50%. 3. China attempts escalated economic and cyber warfare against Australia. Probability, 30%. All three paths depend on one thing: Australia's choice. Bend to China or stand with the West. This isn't about military strength. It's about rocks. 3 minerals: iron ore, lithium, rare earths, give Australia power over a superpower. China doesn't fear Australia's military. They fear Australia's geography. They fear that beneath the red desert of Western Australia lies something they cannot replicate, cannot replace, and cannot live without. And that's why a country of 26 million people can stand up to a country of 1.4 billion and win. Not with guns, with geology. This is the resource war the media isn't covering. The invisible conflict that will define the next decade of geopolitics. If you want more deep dives like this, subscribe now. I'm covering the stories mainstream media won't touch. Comment below. Do you think China will move on Taiwan by 2027? I'll respond to every serious answer. And watch this next video where I break down what happens to the global economy if China actually takes Taiwan. The economic fallout will shock you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.